I have in the past handed out this piece of dialogue to people at the first class and said, you have one line of dialogue for an audition. You know, it's a Spielberg movie, just so you know. And you walk in, you say this line, and that's your only line. That's the only line for the audition. So what would you do with it?
You promised to bring me the notes for the lecture. I waited for you, and when you turned up...
You promised me to bring the notes for the lecture, and when you didn't turn up, I knew you'd forgotten as usual.
You promised to bring the notes from the lecture. I waited for you, and when you didn't turn up, I knew you'd forgotten as usual. You promised to bring me the notes for the lecture. I waited for you. And when you didn't turn up, I knew you'd forgotten, as usual.
You promised to bring me the notes for the lecture, and I waited for you. And when you didn't turn up, I knew that you had forgotten as usual.
You promised to bring me the notes for the lecture. I waited for you, and when you didn't turn up, I knew you'd forgotten as usual.
You promised to bring me the notes for the lecture. I waited for you, and when you didn't turn up, I knew you'd forgotten, as usual.
You promised to bring me the notes from the lecture. When you didn't show up, I knew you'd forgotten as usual.
You promised to bring me the notes for the lecture. I waited for you, and when you didn't turn up, I knew you'd forgotten as usual.
You promised to bring the notes for the lecture. I waited for you. And when you didn't show up, I knew you had forgotten. Forgotten. As usual.
You promised to bring me the notes for the lecture. I waited for you, and when you didn't turn up, I knew you'd forgotten, as usual.
You promised to give me the notes to the lecture, and when you didn't turn up, I knew you'd forgotten, as usual.
You promised to bring me the notes for the lecture. I waited for you, and when you didn't turn up, I know you had forgotten, as usual.
And that's what a day of watching auditions actually looks like. And you're trying to figure out, so which ones were Australian, which ones were New Zealand? Because there's a slight difference in the accent. Okay. So do you see what happens when you make no choices? I mean, it's like you can kind of tell. It's everybody looked at a line of dialogue, decided how to play it. Nobody was playing an action. There was no past. Nobody had a relationship with a partner. There was no plot. I mean, when I look at everything the 17 things we came up with just off the top of our heads. So yes, if I went through it piece by piece, you promised to bring me the notes for the lecture. So, I mean, my God, it's like, so who are you? So now I have to make a decision. So the shopping for a choice of who you are, I'll say, well, let me just see what else I want to do with this. And so you promised. So now I'm really shopping because I want to know, where were we when you promised, and why did I ask you to promise, and why can't I go to? Why am I not at the lecture, and why did I need the notes for the lecture? And so I just need to make some decisions there. So then I suddenly said to myself, oh, I know exactly where we were. I know what state of undress we were. Good. That feeds me. I love that. It's like I shop around and shop around and I shop around and I shop around. And again, we all go to the same thing. What lecture? What notes for a lecture? Why do I need you to bring them to me? Why am I not going? But with all that, you can see, I'm telling you something. Stella wrote this for a really good reason, because it's horrible. Because there's so many questions. But I can make decisions. I can make decisions. I like the decision that the person I'm talking to is just adorable, but a total fuck up. I personally like that one. It just sounds like, the sort of thing that it reminds me of the assistant who said, "I'd love for you to look at this actor." And I think to myself, so now I've got this assistant, and then it gives me something to play. And at one particular point, I fall in love with the choice. And you can see what happens with every one of those actors who had like 10 minutes to prepare. But it's like everybody went for a line reading. And I'm telling you, I don't know about you, but I wouldn't have hired any of them. I mean, it's like I would have hired my 8-year-old nephew when he was 8. Now he's in his 30s, and he's such a pain in the ass. Anyway, all right, so I've made my point. You get it. If you had, I don't know what we watch, 15 actors, so that's a normal day. So if you watch 15 actors, and seriously, I give this assignment all the time, and nobody makes any choice whatsoever. And you can see what I mean by one choice. If you make one choice, like, who am I? You're a step ahead of anybody else that just auditioned. It really is true. If you will stop yourself from making a choice without thinking about the choice that you're making, you'll be a step ahead. So that's it, gang darlings. Look, what we will do, it's next week, which is kind of our last week, but we'll get together again in January. But the point of all of this, it was ridiculous to think that in 6 weeks we could cover technique and script. But just the idea that we can see what the pieces of the puzzle are and that they're doable. Nothing that I've talked about, and certainly nothing that Stella ever taught, is not doable. I am not, we're not looking at it and saying, all right, I want you to find the most difficult moment you've ever had in your childhood, and I want you to go back and relive this moment in your childhood. We're not doing any of that. That's not doable. That's impossible. I don't think it is possible to stare at a person across the room and say, your shirt is blue, my shirt is blue, your shirt is blue, my shirt. I can't do it. And I've tried. I mean, I've been arguing with Meisner people now for decades. And so they assure me I just don't get it. And so they said, no, try it, really try it. And I said, okay. Your shirt is blue. Your shirt is blue. No, you're putting too much on it. Oh, I mean, I was always getting in trouble. I was putting too much on it. And I said, but I'm bored. And you're boring me. And your shirt is boring. It's a boring blue shirt. Now I have a shirt. And so they gave up. So I wasn't good with that. I was much too uptight to talk about traumas of my childhood. So that wasn't going to work. At any rate, so these are all things that are doable. You can look at a piece of text and figure out what I'm talking about, what the sequence of thoughts is. And then you get really good at talking out, improvising around it, embellishing it, whatever word you want to use, talking about it freely so that I own it. And then there's a point where I do own it. Then there's a point where I say, oh yeah, I got that thought. I have a student who did the national tour and God, he was a wonderful actor and had a wonderful voice, but he did the national tour of Hamilton. And he said the biggest issue for him was, he said, there are no moments. He said, if I stop too long, 3 people trip over me. So I think that is its own ability to be able to make that work.